My first book about planet Earth. Hi, my name is Silicon. I am sister of carbon. While my sister carbon makes up the life on planet Earth, I make up the rocks forming the Earth's crust. My sister carbon, with her two brothers from oxygen, form a blanket, CO2, that keeps me and my brothers warm, feeds the plants who feed the animals, and puts bubbles in the waters that carve me with holes so that I can hold water like a sponge. I, with my two brothers from oxygen, form the rocks that cover the planet. We were all born in a distant star, and when the sun died, we were spit out into space. With time, and with the help of gravity, we were gradually all crowded together into a 14,000-kilometer diameter ball. I, silicon, with my two brothers oxygen, share the 5 to 50-kilometer thick crust of planet Earth, and I share it with my cousins aluminium, calcium, and magnesium. Below us was a 3,000-kilometer thick molasses of half-melted rock that I shared mostly with my heavier cousin magnesium. The next 4,000 kilometers, called the core, was out of my territory. It was a sea of melted iron and nickel, with a solid center, much like a kernel in a fruit. When I woke up, I found myself slowly moving around in my cozy sea called magma. Then I noticed that the slow current started to go faster. At first, it was great, as a while back I was hardly moving at all. But then the current got faster and faster until it got so fast that I did not quite know what was happening. Then, before I knew it, the mountain we were all in suddenly burped, and I found myself being slowly spit out. The ones before me were spit out as gases that filled the air with ash and solidified in the air like hail. We called them pumice. When I got to the mountain's mouth, I found I was flowing down with what seemed to me the entire magma. We flowed into a very deep ocean, and we cooled off so quickly that we didn't have much time to form crystals. Our crystals were so small that you could only see them with a magnifying glass. Like glaciers crack when they melt and mud cracks when it dries out, we cracked on cooling and formed pillar structures. As we were cooling down, we found ourselves shrinking, which really made us crack up, and we filled the cracks with all the space that we lost when we cooled and shrunk. Some of us found ourselves in very bending situations, and some of us eventually folded. We were known for making good building materials for humans because we broke up into boulders with shapes like blocks. We were called Basalt, and we covered most of the ocean floor. We were very fine-grained because we cooled so fast and did not have time to develop our crystals. Many of us landed up as pillars and walls for humans. For those that cooled and solidified slowly because they remained underground, their only hope for freedom was to be pushed up out of the ground by some underground upheaval. Those rocks were called granite. The slower granite cooled, the bigger crystal grains it had, and the coarser it became. Big pieces of granite ended up to be eventually pushed up to proudly show their face to the sun. Some ended up to be polished and used as kitchen tabletops. I ended up in the middle of a large mass of land called continent. An ice age arrived and dumped all its ice on continent. And when the ice started to melt, continent got flooded. Salts accumulated in the depression caused by the heavy ice. Eventually, the inland ocean overflowed and drained. As continent drained and the melting ice moved, rocks were broken into boulders, crushed into stones, polished into pebbles, ground into sand, and pulverized into silt, which mixed with aluminium and made clay so that humans could make their own rocks in any shape and form they liked. The land was sculptured as if by a giant clawing hand and shaped by the draining waters in the very same way as waterfalls carved the land. Bays of all sizes formed. The residue of rocks eventually were carried down by water and gravity, where they accumulated and settled as hills called moraines. The rivers washed the rock down to the sea, breaking them up along the way until the rocks reached the oceans, where they were broken into sand by the pounding waves. They accumulated as sediment, and the pressure of the ocean squeezed the silt, mud, and sand so tightly together that siltstone, mudstone, and sandstone were formed. These sedimentary rocks were used for building houses, walls, and bridges. I eventually got washed down into the ocean and lived a while as a sedimentary rock. I got mixed up with a bunch of seashells. We were so tightly squeezed together that my crystals got recrystallized. From then on, I was called limestone. Because water with CO2 made holes in me, you will find me wherever you find a cave. Limestone was used to build the pyramids and expensive limestone buildings that were built to last longer than sandstone buildings. I didn't stay limestone for long. I got buried very deep, and the pressures and temperatures were so high that my crystals got aligned like soldiers on a march. I got harder and more beautiful, and others started to call me marble. Sedimentary rocks changed their crystalline structure under great temperatures or pressures. Their crystals got aligned or foliated more and more the deeper the rocks were buried. When shale, many with fossils, were buried deep under continent, they changed to a different rock depending on how deep they were buried. First into slate, then phyllite, schist, and finally into gneiss, as if the fossils of shale changed into the tiger stripes of gneiss. When sandstone metamorphized, it changed into quartzite. When limestone was buried deep under continent, the pressures and high temperatures recrystallized the calcium crystals, and it metamorphized into marble, and that is what happened to me. With time, I was fortunate to have been heaved out of my burial place and saw the sun one more time. Marble was used to make beautiful floors and buildings and statues that were built to last even longer than limestone. I was so beautiful with my new foliated crystals that a human saw me one day and used me to make a statue so beautiful that many people came from far away to look at it. I was unfortunately in the part of the statue that many people touched. One day, as I was being moved to a new museum, I was scratched off the statue, and the crate I was in was put on a ship and it sailed across the ocean where it sank. There, at the bottom of the ocean, I waited for my next move and contemplated on the past and wondered about the future. At a point in time and at a point in space, life evolved on Earth, and it took roots on its barren crust. Plants learned to manipulate sunlight and air to grow and multiply. As plants thrived, they dug their roots deep into the crust and gave it life, forming the 10 to 50 centimeters of the ground called Earth that allow life to live, animals to survive, and evolve into humans. Man quickly learned to make his very own rocks. Some say man is like a virus and will one day kill its host planet Earth, which gave it life. Others say humans are sperms of planet Earth. Just like plants ejaculate their seeds and animals ejaculate their sperm, one day man will ejaculate himself far away from Earth and go to another part of the universe to replicate Earth and her nature. As I was contemplating, the Earth suddenly shook. Before I knew it, I was being pushed under deeper and deeper into the magma I remember waking up in. Earth was hit by a comet, and just at the place where I was meditating. I melted in the warmth of my bed, and before going to sleep, wondered what kind of rocks I will be tomorrow. Will I be pumice in some human's bathtub scraping the feet of a beautiful human? Or part of a glass she's drinking from? Or part of her kitchen tabletop? Or perhaps even a small part of the silicone in her breasts? One can always dream. As he was dozing off to sleep, he realized he was back in the magma from where he came from, covered and entrapped by a layer of rock called the ocean floor. He was relieved to know that ocean was on top, keeping the crust from melting, allowing both life to thrive on top and fire to burn below. Continents of land floated over the crust like rafts drifting on a lake. Like floating driftwood, they drifted until stopped. When stopped, weather watered it from above so that life could take root from the tops of mountains to the bottom of oceans. A tree grew and embraced a rock so tightly that when hit by a lightning, it was dislodged with the rock. Time freed the jagged rock from the tight grip of the tree, and it landed in a river that was flowing to the oceans far, far away. Water entered its cracks, froze into ice, expanded, and pried the cracks open, breaking the rock into small enough pieces to be carried down by the water. As the rocks rolled down to the ocean, boulders broke into scree and into smaller and smaller pieces like sand. Rocks of all sizes collected on the ocean beaches and were polished into pebbles, ground and pulverized by the waves into silt and clay, and carried out by the tides to cover the ocean floor. The sediments formed layers that could be read millions of years later like chapters in the Earth's record book. When sand layers were pressed by the weight of the water and the weight of accumulating sediment, they turned into sandstone. The mountains washed down to the ocean, and the sand mingled with the life there, and they found themselves bonded in bed together. A volcano erupted in celebration. Magma broke out of the crust as if to witness and give warmth to this bonding of life and sand called limestone. Volcanoes erupted and ejaculated magma like they were seeds in squirts that cooled into sponge rocks called pumice. As if giving birth, So much magma flowed out that it covered up the volcanoes and stopped their flow. The rocks they formed cooled off fast and had a very fine crystal, making them dense rocks called basalts. Magma, unable to flow out, cooled slowly within the volcano into grainy rocks called granite. The lighter granite gradually displaced the heavier basalt and escaped the confines of the volcano to float and to form the land called continents. Most of the land was covered by a thin layer of sand which united with life to form humus. Humus, the rock plants grow in, is a sponge soaked with life. When soaked with water, humus forms lakes and hollows, even on tops of mountains. Silt was pressed together into slate and carved into durable roofs. Limestone was pressed together into marble and carved into beautiful statues. A granite deep under the earth, with time, floated up to its freedom and raised layers of lighter sedimentary rock that were resting on it like logs. This upheaval gradually drained the ocean above it dry. A bed of rock called salt was left behind. It was the accumulation of all the salts washed down from the mountains that were washed down into the ocean. Life, called plants, buried underground, decomposed into a soft black oil called petroleum. Other life decomposed into a soft black rock called coal, which when cooked and rolled deep in the ovens of the earth turned into a hard white rock called diamonds. A mountain broke through that was once an ocean. Then it started to snow. The snow covered the land until just the peak of the mountain was visible. The pressure of the snow turned the snow into a flowing ice called a glacier. The glacier moved like an amoeba and carved the land like an artist, grounding the rocks underneath into sand and silt. When the glaciers finally melted, the rocks from the crumbling mountains that fell on top of them accumulated into hills and were left behind as moraines that soon sprouted with life.